Welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings Here on Earth and such. Anyway, philosophy. Talking about what it means to be alive, conscious machine on planet Earth in 2021 or whatever. And what can we see about this reality, okay, that's useful in terms of will make it so things tomorrow will be better than things today. And by tomorrow, I mean tomorrow and tomorrow and, like Shakespeare, on and on. There's lots of tomorrows. And the point would be is that the best you can do is when you add up all the tomorrows, what did you do? What's the net balance for all the tomorrows? Did you make the world a better place? Did you say things and interact in ways that made it so fewer birds fell out of their nest, or, by some standard? So as soon as I say by some standard, I'm stuck with there's only one standard, and that is when you add it all up. How many things did you knock over to stop the one thing from falling over, right? So you're running to stop something from falling over, yet you're doing it in a china shop, so you end up knocking over other stuff to stop the one thing from falling over, kind of problem. That's the biggest problem in having the argument, is there's stuff falling over. We need to stop the stuff from falling over. The only way to stop the stuff from falling over is to knock stuff over. And, we're going to have these different opinions about what was acceptable to lose. What things we could knock off the shelves because we save the thing that's more valuable. So that apparently, which is kind of sensible, is the hardest part of this job of figuring out how to navigate the china shop and successfully accomplish the task of being what would be called productive in terms of being a china shop navigator. Now, I don't know how else I could illustrate the problem. I mean, I know that, but see, I don't know of how else. Well, there's probably lots of other analogies I could give you for explaining how metaphoring what your existence is. And so over the years, I've tried to point out many times, your life is really just about what you're going to write on your tombstone. Fail or succeed. I mean, that's all there is. There's just the idea that you made the world better. That is, the sentient organisms in the universe, we're listening to better music. We're drinking cleaner water. We're going, oh, that feels good. Oh, I'm very relaxed and comfortable. Yeah, they were doing that more than screaming on fire. That's it. That's all there is to your existence. I mean, you can pretend your existence is about, well, I feel okay. But it really isn't. That's just the little tiniest part of your existence is what happened to me. I mean, as much as you think the story is, what happened to me? No, that's not the story. I wish it was this story. I wish it was that simple, that all I had to do was figure out how to make me happy, and there was nothing else to worry about. And everything else can, screw it. Yeah, but that's not. So that makes it, that would be the easy way to live. Well, let's not even say easy, right? Because people are frankly so stupid that they can't even do I right. They can't even figure out what's in their own interest. They can't even figure out the tomorrow thing for themselves, and that's why they get into all kinds of trouble. I, for example, smoked cigarettes when I was a kid. Bad decision. And, and as an addict, I remained resolute in rationalizing excuses not to quit today, tomorrow. Yeah, some other day I'll do it. But yeah, I'll feel that it'll be easier tomorrow. I'm sure it'll be easier tomorrow to do it. So I'll wait till then. Making excuses. And so, very risky behavior, stupid, blah, 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 all that crap. But yeah, I couldn't do much about navigating the subject rationally because there was a bunch of irrationality motivating me. The strings were pulled in terms of creating a personal incentive that I couldn't get past, in the sense that it seemed like more work. It seemed like in some cases for people, it seems like it's a lot less work just to die. A lot of people are suicidal, right? I mean, at some point in their life, because it's just too big a pain in the ass. I just don't want the obligations, the consequences. They have a bad hair day and that's enough. They just can't take any more ridicule, or they can't take any more bullshit. And it's just like, fuck this. And ironically, they end up being pro-lifers, trying to force everybody else to have kids or something. But anyway, that's a whole nother aspect of the dysfunction in terms of the perspective. So I will get back to the point of the first problem is getting people to accept your role here, which is you really do have an obligation to be a bit of a philosopher, in terms of you have to see beyond yourself, because you're not playing a single player game, and that everything you do in the world, the splashes of the acid, you're stomping in stuff, and the splashes are hitting things, okay, in critical ways. It's like your tires running on a road and it's throwing lots of rocks through people's windows. Your bullets, you're shooting your gun for fun or something, and the bullets are actually landing somewhere. It's that kind of thing. Nothing you do, it just affects you. And that's just a fact. I wish there was some better way to explain it, but there really isn't. I mean, it's just the simple truth about your existence, is that you're making tomorrow. You're building the infrastructure of it. What buildings fall down, how things happen, what happens is on you. Just the truth. Now, how much of it is on you, or how meaningful your potential impact is, it's almost another moot conversation, because the fact is, it's immeasurable. It'd be nice if we could all just say my influence is too trivial, but it's the whole butterfly effect. Everything adds up, and so every little piece of the wind makes the tornado. And even if your contribution is small, it can be vital to the fact of whether it goes over the tipping things, the things wobbling on the table. All they need is a little tiny influence, a little breath of air, and they tip over. So we can't even measure how significant or insignificant we are. People who think they're very significant might be very insignificant. People that look like they're significant might be very insignificant, in that they could be eliminated, from the story, and the story still was made out of all the little wind, not the big wind, the substance of the crisis. Yeah. So, so all of it, if you're going to take your existence seriously, then yes, you have to acknowledge that these are big decisions. Whether you believe in a God or don't believe in a God, big decision, okay? In terms of understanding how to navigate the maze. So once we understand there's a maze, the maze is played by you, but everything you do affects things equal to yourself in the maze. It's almost like every step you take changes the structure of the maze, not only for you, but for everything else that's in the maze. So we're all stepping in a boat made out of like Jello or something, And every step we take vibrates other people's part of the boat, and can throw them off the boat. And so every step is meaningful in terms of it's worth worrying about. Because if you do misstep, you ruin somebody else's life. Now, this is just true as a practical matter. I'm trying to give, in videos, I've explained things like, how you even choose to get into a relationship with somebody. You have to recognize that, which most people don't, but if you do think about it, it's a huge responsibility. Because if you involve yourself with somebody, then they're not probably going to get involved with somebody else. So there's somebody else who would have been, but isn't, with them or together. So in a way, you're interrupting, a whole series of relationships, because then the person, that guy who ended up with, say you didn't marry your wife, then your wife would be married to somebody else. Well, the somebody they married, she would have been married to somebody else, and he would have been married, her husband would have been married to somebody, everybody would have been married to somebody else. I mean, the whole thing changes. Millions and millions of relationships change because you changed one relationship. That's the potential. And that's a pretty big responsibility, right? I mean, not only should you understand philosophically that you have this obligation to be the best choice your wife could have made, right? Your mate, your lover, your whatever. You kind of sort of have that obligation, right? I mean, if you're going to interfere with her destiny, it would be a good idea that you did it in some constructive and productive way, where she's so much better off than she would have been, right? That's how you always have to kind of look at it. And what I'm saying is the philosophical implication of that little idea you might be able to understand, is understanding that goes for everything you do, and almost everything that happens in the world, is connected to what you got to take it seriously. So, I mean, people have kids and they really don't take any of that seriously, because they're going to push buttons every day on their kid. Every day they're pushing a button that might make them into a psycho killer, might make them sexually dysfunctional for the rest of their life. All these decisions you're making, and they all take it like, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm just having fun raising kids. I like raising kids. They're fun to watch. I like watching when they fall down and go, well, and they cry and do all that crap and blah, 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 blah. I enjoy all that shit. I enjoy yelling at children and, get in the house. Blah, blah, blah. Stay off the street. I like doing that. It's fun. That's what they're doing, apparently. I mean, I guess there's some other little joyful moments. I don't know exactly. They're powdering their little butts. Ooh, I'm powdering their little butt. I don't know what they're doing exactly. That's, it compels them to say, what a great idea. I'll spend my life doing this. And I can watch them grow up into a slut or, a nice urban young man, looking for whores, to steal their welfare checks. I mean, they really don't take what they're doing very responsibly, in the sense of recognizing, I'm building a monster that I'm going to set upon the world, and that I'm going to let bounce on the boat, right? He's going to get on the boat and he's going to start jiggling all the crap all over the place, and he could make a real huge mess. I could not instruct him properly on how to take responsibility for your life and take it seriously. And frankly, he could just go drive a little bit too fast and rip some little 6-year-old's arm off, or worse, a lot worse. Anyway, all right, so in the context of having this conversation about the fact that life is apparently, okay, it could be argued that it's serious business, that there's huge stakes at something. Yes, I'm getting old and doddery. I can't remember that. At risk. That's it. The word risk. There's huge stakes in the game we're playing, and every little. And this is, this isn't just roll dice game. Your brain isn't just rolling, my brain's just rolling dice to come up with ideas. No, your brain can know this structure. You know, you can almost say it's a mathematical structure. You know, 2 plus 2, then 4 plus 4, and then 8 plus 8. You know, you can. It's almost like it's a little, you know, mathematical table. And you really, you know, it's really that simple that every decision you make is really just about, did I pull out the tape measure and I measure the distance, or did I just guess? Was I lazy? Did I try very hard to get the angles right? Did I, you know, get a standard square so I could make all the corners square? Did I do any of the work to build a mental capacity to measure how much I'm affecting the boat, to have some idea about, a realistic idea about whether I'm affecting the boat in some positive or very negative way, you know, in terms of the waves I'm making. And so it's clearly, you know, this idea of more information is good. I mean, information is a great thing, but really the greatest information is getting, you know, is having the foundational information. How to use the tape measure, you know, that kind of thing. That's the, you know, being able to, you know, oh, it pulls out. Oh, yes, you can go, oh, yeah, and if I take 10 feet and then 10 feet and 10 feet, I can make 30 feet. You know, I can put little markers, and I can, you know, learning how to do the, you know, it's not calculus, but to do the calculations of having realistic perceptions. So, obviously, most people, I'd say most, can figure this out. I don't know. See, I'm just guessing at a number when I say most. Maybe it's not. I mean, frankly, just because of how some people behave, you'd say maybe they don't. Most of them wouldn't. But most people know they don't take the you know, the mortgage on the house to Las Vegas with them. You know, they don't. The deed to the house or whatever, you know what I'm saying, the equity of the house to Las Vegas. They say, okay, well, I know I shouldn't do that because that would be really stupid. You know, you don't bet the house. You don't bet, you know, you don't do something. You don't just pour gasoline on yourself and then say, I'm going to go outside with a magnifying glass and look at the sun. You know, I mean, stupid things. But the argument is that just getting the stupidest things, you know, being able to not do something completely ridiculously stupid isn't much of an accomplishment. That there are so many things you're doing that have such dramatic effect and you're not paying any attention. Like every time you get into your car, you know, every single time you do it, it's a real event where there's real risk and there's a real obligation for you not to be distracted by your phone and not to do this and not to, I mean, there's lots of not to do's. Not to turn the radio up and start, you know, dancing on the gas pedal. You know, bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. I mean, these are kind of obvious, and these are how accidents, right, happen. Is not because it's an accident. It's because the person didn't have any realistic, you know, they didn't, again, measure anything accurately. They just says, it doesn't look like much of a jump. You know, it's 48 feet. Oh, yeah, I can do that. No. No, an unrealistic perception of the reality. Chasing mirages. You know, being fooled by one in the first place, right? You're in the desert. Now, there's two kinds of people, right? The person who could fall for it, right? And the person who, oh, I've heard of this, you know, where this looks like water over there because of the bending of the light, and there really isn't water over there with palm trees and all that kind of crap. Because I've heard of this phenomenon, so I'm not going to be fooled by it. And so that's how the people come. Is these different people have different knowledge, okay? And that knowledge means that they can tell the difference between the fake, it looks like it's going to be okay, and wait a minute, it's not okay. Lots to worry about. And this is fundamentally what I'm arguing on this channel, is that there are certain mistakes you can make, like religion, that are just too frickin' stupid. I mean, man, you're really missing reality. You know, you have no realistic understanding of the planet you're on or the space you're in or anything. If you think, you know, there's some creator that's going to save the day, you know, by flooding the planet and starting over. He sort of promised not to do that again, but, you know. I mean, it's the story is so ridiculous, and it just creates a bunch of notions about how this isn't my fault, that I don't have to take responsibility because there's some other maze creator and little bot maker who's responsible for all the catastrophes, and none of the little players have to worry about it because there's some master maze maker, you know, who's responsible for the maze. No, we're all responsible, and we're all responsible for the truth we ignore. Okay, so I'd argue that you have all this evidence, evolution is the obvious truth. There was no floods and there was no creation and all that crap is just storytelling, you know, by people you didn't have any respect for anyway, from countries you think are full of morons anyway. So why are you believing any of that horse shit anyway? You know, you can make so many arguments. And you're stepping over all those arguments to go to a truth you want because it's comfortable for you. Because it makes it easier for you to live your little selfish life as a little selfish moron. You can go stomping around on the boat with so much more comfort and liberty, because you don't have to think about every single step and say, ooh, is that a good step or a bad step? You can just say, God made me do it. You know, you can just come up with some excuse to evade taking responsibility for what you could have known or you should have known. Yeah, both of those things. You could have known. You could have thought about it. And you certainly should have recognized that, yes, there's implications. I'm changing things. Like I said, I'm breathing air that somebody else might be able to use, right? There's some guy over there somewhere who really needs oxygen very badly. He's grasping for, and I just used it up. Going, I just used up. Oh, sorry. You know, this air would have been going over there, and by the time it gets to over where he is, it doesn't have enough oxygen in it because I took all the oxygen out, and I just gave him back a bunch of CO2 and shit. So he's out of luck because I took his oxygen. It's a fact. I'm just saying these are, you know, this is how bad this game is. All right, is that just how difficult it is to play, and to win. In the sense that if you think winning is, I got to score high, you know, I can't get a low score. I can't screw up. Well, you don't have a chance. Is the, you know, the bottom line is this is way too messy to play smart. Smart knows the game isn't by any, the rational rules don't really exist. Because the other consequence was the guy I just suffocated, he happened to be a child molester, you know, with coronavirus, and I finished him off. And so I actually did a good thing, and I didn't even know it. But the bad news is, oh, the kid he was going to molest. He was, you know, he would have been a great human being if he got molested, because then he would have had some sort of integrity and character. But because he didn't get molested and didn't have a hard enough childhood, he grew up to be a complete self-indulgent asshole who just played golf all day. And he would have, if he had gotten molested, cured cancer. So, oh, fuck, I'm in trouble again. You know, so you can just do this forever. And so obviously an intelligence says, well, why do I only want to play this moronic game where every single thing, I'm again China shop, every single thing I try to do starts something else in motion. And you know, how the hell can I stop one thing and start something else? This is Rube Goldberg. This is insane. How can I possibly measure all these permutations? How can I possibly navigate? Why would I? Why would I? Except for the fact that I want to get to my heroin. I want to get to my bucket of food. You know, or I don't want something that's precious to me, okay, you know, my baby, to be sitting under these daggers. You know, whatever way to metaphor the personal motivations that exist in people. Now, I just gave two personal motivations that for most people don't have anything to do with what motivates them, which is winning. You know, just the superficial, I want to be a winner, I want to, you know, I want the money and the chicks for free and, you know, all the stuff that goes with fame and fortune and blah, 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 whatever they're chasing, winning. You know, they're not paying much attention to just how much of it, you know, again, the reality is that to get what you want, you're likely to compromise other people's needs, their dependencies. In fact, you'll tip them off the table. So, and you know, that's just not a fact you can live with. I mean, there's no way to, like I said, your intelligence isn't going to save you in terms of saying, okay, well, all we have to do is know it's a very delicate game and we have to play it very carefully. Because you're still going to have to do an insane amount of calculations and you don't have enough time to do them. You don't have enough time to think about all these permutations and figure out all of these risks and to figure out what the right decision is. Because by the time you did do that, it'd be way past the time you had to make the decision. You know, the decision is moot because you didn't make it because you couldn't fit or you couldn't do the calculation in time. So it's not going to do any good anyway. So the point is you need intelligence to recognize that the only way to play a good game is to play an intelligent game. The game requires intelligence. You can't sneak your way through because it's just not going to work. There's too many decisions that will be viewable. Too many things that will be obvious. Okay, so you need to apply intelligence, but you can never apply enough of it. So you'll never be able to play a truly good game. You'll always have to leave some risk, you know, that you just guessed. You know, you'll have to do a lot of just guessing. Oh, well, you know, I'll just eeny, meeny, miny, mo. You know, that kind of crap. And that's just going to be obnoxious. Once you're intelligent, you're going to find it very obnoxious that there's a bunch of randomness in this strategy game. You know, you're trying to play some smart game where you plan everything, and there's some force that's going to keep just breaking the plan. You know, keep forcing you to re-engineer and re-engineer. It's like having a car that just constantly breaks. So every time, you know, as soon as you fix one piece, it runs for 15 feet. And then some other piece pops off and you have to screw it back in. And then some other piece pops off and you have to screw it back in. And who would want to drive the car? You know. Who? There's probably an answer to that, like Homer Simpson or something. But then we'd be back to the subject, which is the first obligation is to agree that anyone playing the game should be required to understand their responsibilities. That just, you know, the qualifier to play the game should be, this is what you're risking. That you could do something as simple as eat a potato chip and give somebody cancer. You know, that the simplest things you are doing can have implications that are catastrophic. You know, and you won't know it. But it's going to be a fact of your existence. That's a little daunting, isn't it? And the real question is that not true? And the fact is, it's true. All the facts indicate that's exactly the truth. I said one of these sentences poorly, therefore. I mean, that's the truth of it. Everything we do, it's all this stuff piled on top of it. All of this accountability and responsibility. All of this power to make a mess. You know. And it's, who but an insane person would say, great, that's fun. No, it's not fun. Anyway, I'll take a little pause. And, yeah, I'm just going to take a pause to refocus, to try to get this. I want to eventually get to this, the conversation about people who use the word philosophy, and it doesn't really mean anything until you're talking about the actual reality, So it's related to this, the whole context of this conversation, and just how many parts of it are so broken in terms of antinatalists arguing with ethalists, and but the whole idea of the sub context, which is that these people think they're professional philosophers and have a whole professional philosophy structure, but it doesn't have anything to do with what I just explained, which is understanding what you're doing here on Earth as a biological machine. I mean, they don't even get that part. They'll call themselves philosophers, and they haven't even figured out that everything they're thinking is a byproduct of a bunch of the universing. That it was all predetermined by circumstances, and the only reason why it has anything called continuity is because the universe sort of requires there to be symmetry. Planets go round. There's certain rules, and they also apply to logic, and they also apply to brain function in terms of why things exist. And then you get into the whole argument about evolution and what evolution actually does and how it actually works by just creating a bunch of failure, to create something that's better than, and that's it. Just a little bit, and just in one circumstance better than. I mean, all of that context, and then they'll talk as if there's some meaning to having a philosophical conversation in some context where ideas aren't measured by any kind of explicit physics, let's say. Like these people might believe in entanglement or something. Well, your philosophy is already fundamentally broken if you think the fundamental universe is capable of this entanglement thing. If there's a mechanism that could possibly make that possible, then every bit of the jiggling on the boat is happening by a whole different dynamic. So one mistake in your philosophical drawing of reality is critical to navigating the maze. I mean, it's like just getting right and left wrong. Your map isn't going to work. Your map isn't going to be the territory at all. And so saying you're a professional, you're qualified professional philosopher, no, because you're just wrong. I mean, being wrong is just being wrong. I mean, wrong for good reasons or wrong for bad reasons. So you can go to school and be educated, and they can educate you poorly, and so you end up being wrong. Well, you could say, okay, you made a good effort to be right, and it's just you were misled or you were cheated out of gaining any benefit of that good intention because they gave you misinformation. So that would sort of be the argument. But you're going to be just as wrong as Homer Simpson, just as wrong as somebody who didn't care about being qualified. It's like you can have a driving instructor who just tells you a few things that were just wrong, and you end up, having an accident because he didn't tell you the thing he needed to tell you, which is be scared to death. Be constantly worrying that somebody's going to kill you. He didn't tell you that. So anyway, so I'll pause to get where I'm going, maybe. But we'll see. Yeah, it's back to recording. Yeah, the icon doesn't change. It's really kind of annoying. Can't tell. You click something, you expect something to change, but it doesn't change. So you say, well, did that work? But anyway, not your problem. I don't know whether these pauses do me much good, frankly, because you think of so many more angles to approach the conversation. All right, so a big part, I'll play some clips out of this, but there's a bunch of argument about my style of argument, okay, over the last 15 years or whatever it is I've been on YouTube. And clearly that style has changed a lot. Now, I never had I always like things to be friendly. I'm a friendly kind of person, frankly. And so if you don't insult me, I'm not going to insult you. Okay, it really doesn't happen that way, ever. But some people make videos, for example, where they're saying something just brutally stupid, and it's consequential. So you could argue that if I was to play some Trump supporters video or something, something that I'm just going to find totally obnoxious because it's going to be based on such ignorant nonsense, I'm going to have frustration, no doubt about it, and I'm going to argue in aggressively. This might say. I frankly still don't think, over the years that, yes, all of that, much of that tension has been beaten out of me because I've learned to have no expectation that people are reasonable, and that, I have such a lesser opinion of human intelligence, and even the honesty or integrity of people. Like, they really just don't have any. And so I have such a lesser opinion of people that most of my frustration was built out of the fact that I did have a higher expectation, that I did expect people to be honest and have some, decent integrity and all that kind of stuff, and they really don't. So I don't react as I used to because, I don't have very high expectations, frankly. So, I don't have as much invested in it personally, let's say. I recognize that just making the argument isn't good enough, that this is some sort of performance art, that people aren't going to be persuaded because a reasonable person tells them so. They're not going to be persuaded until a celebrity tells them so. You have to have the same exact words, stated by somebody who they like, or else it doesn't work. That kind of, it's so imbecilic and so bad that I can't take it. I can't take it as a personal insult that I wasn't persuasive. Where in the past I did, like somehow, it was my fault. And so that's what made me uncomfortable, and that's what made me aggressive, is my own discomfort and somehow thinking I failed when, and I didn't. Okay, it's that they're impossible. They don't function. So my expectation that they function properly was, part of the problem. But anyway. But, you go through all my videos, very few of them am I yelling and shouting and all that kind of crap. These are usually only after arguments have gotten very personal and people are making statements that are offensive and rude and all that kind of crap. And I've logically defended myself against a lie or something else that's been perpetrated. And so even all of that has gotten, who cares anymore, just because it's all same old, same old. I mean, we're actually coming full circle in the sense that there's people now posting, Hitler's face on me, on parts of my body and stuff. It's a ridiculous, that, so they first perpetrate a lie that I'm somehow pro-Hitler because I'm anti some historical facts, because I don't think Jews were made into soap. So therefore, I'm pro-Hitler. No. So the argument is so ludicrous, that I shouldn't have to counter-argue this, right? This doesn't add up in any way whatsoever. So it's just so bad. The argument, their argument is so bad that you almost have to say, okay, well, if that's all they've got, I'm winning. I am being persuasive because this is how desperate. They can't find anything find anything meaningful I actually said to argue with. They have to sit there and pretend that I said I love Hitler because I said I don't think every story ever told was the truth. Or that I'm anti-Semitic in some way when there's absolutely no evidence that I have any give a damn about whether, I don't, I don't personally care what ethnicity or race or any of that crap. It's, it's certainly relevant as in it's a feature of people's existence, but I don't have any presumptive, I don't make any presumptive assessments about anybody or based on any of those things. I don't waste any time profiling or listening to any notions. Somebody sent me, somebody. I get these little crappy emails from some lunatics. They think they're going to keep educating me or something, so they send it by email because I've already blocked them, of course, or something like that. And it's anonymous. They don't even send it with a return email address. But anyway, saying women's brains are smaller. It's okay. The arguments are so ridiculous. Like they ever proved in the first place that the size of your brain has something to do with how intelligent you are, which there's no proof of anyway. The human race comes in all kinds of sizes. I don't know if people notice that, but yeah. And there's even there's kind of grotesque evidence of the fact that our brain is mostly fluid, mush, that isn't terribly important. Because you can have encephalitis and your whole brain can be essentially smashed onto the sides of your skull, and frankly, the volume is very small of the gray matter if you took it, by mass, and they're almost functional. Yeah, there'll be some degrade in function, but they're pretty, they're still qualifiable as human. And so this is just more part of the what constitutes good versus bad information. People can have information and it can be just junk. This idea that brain size is what it's all about. When you can just watch an ant and figure out how much functionality an ant has. Yes, it's not going to go to high school, okay? It's not going to learn a language. But just think about all the functionality it has. It's got 6 legs, it's got antennas, it's got all kinds of sense organs we don't have, it has all kinds of moving parts we don't have. It's running all of those things, and then they can even fly, right? In one stage of their existence. They can even fly. They're all doing that with this brain. It's just so tiny, and you're just saying, come on, you really think the size of your brain matters? Are you that silly? Obviously, there's more to it. Okay, a lot more to it. Okay, and that even that the difference between the primitive human being who was still a monkey and the human being who was language capable, it's not brain size. It's brain function. There's little things that changed inside the brain. Little things changed. The brain didn't just get bigger and bigger and therefore it got smart all of a sudden because it got to a certain size. I mean, it's just so stupid. I can say it's so stupid, right? And there can be argument about it. So there's things that are so stupid that are more clearly so stupid, like religion. It's clearly so stupid. And then there's other theories that, okay, maybe if you take it apart and analyze the pieces more and more closely, you'll be able to tell the difference between an aluminum part and a platinum part and this and that, and make these distinctions, and so you'll be able to draw these conclusions. So much of this argument is just about that. It's about dissecting the stuff that, okay, we shouldn't even have to bother with this conversation anymore, right? And that's sort of how I think most philosophers are like the Germans a couple hundred years ago, and just saying, look, God is dead. Let's have a conversation about what it means to be alive in that context. So there's no God. Now what? And that's when you get into the whole, well, now we have to have a conversation with nihilist losers like, the Nietzschean types who are just saying, what's in it for me? Because they think playing any bigger game is futile. Because everything will thwart your efforts. So that's sort of Nietzsche was sort of just using the naysayer argument for any good deed doing, because there's always just something in the way. Something will screw it up. And therefore you shouldn't bother. When no, that means you just have to do more work. That means it's worse than we thought. It's not difficult just because it's difficult to do. It's like somebody landing an airplane on an aircraft carrier. It's already difficult, you know that. It's, you know, lots of problems. And now give him a shitty airplane, you know, and now it's really a problem. But you can't fix it by saying, fuck it, I'll just crash in the water. That's stupid. So the nihilist perception that it isn't worth worrying about is just absolute nonsense. Because you can't, because you can't juggle 56 different things, therefore I should just walk away and not try to save anything, would be ludicrous and stupid. So again, it's just too stupid even. Why should I even have to have a conversation with somebody that's stupid? To argue that because I can't juggle 50 things, that means I can't juggle 5. Well, you can still save the 5. All right. So, yeah, so I want to get back to the point that, okay, so this is an argument. You know, there's just arguments about what it is to be human and alive. And so I'm going to argue that there's certain facts. Now, I've been through them in my video, these, you know, key words, you know, the ones that matter, the key concepts, you know, evolution being a huge fact, that we're robots, huge fact, you know, that we don't, you know, we is just a program, okay, running, and the program is being written by the external world wrote it, okay, so you are a byproduct, you aren't a product, you aren't your creation. Okay, you're a creation of an environment that made you, okay, that events that made you, experiences that made you, and that's it, you know, and we're just functioning in this atmosphere, and the only thing we can argue is that the atmosphere has a tendency, that is, human beings have tended to move step by step up a ladder of gaining knowledge of the truth. And I would argue that a couple hundred years ago, one of those statements was, God is dead. Okay, so this is a truth. We're done being philosophers in a mushy storytelling, little fable-y kind of way, and now we're going to take it to this level where now we have to figure it out for ourselves. We can't just let somebody tell us a fairy story about silver lining on clouds and all of that horse shit, and we have to take responsibility for the steps up the ladder. And one of the steps, again, so we have evolution, and then you have this idea of being a robot, and the robot is just programmed, and then you're saying, well, shouldn't I program it to be efficient? So if I'm going to make a machine, should I make a machine that leaks oil? Well, that's not too smart. That wastes the gasoline, that only gets, you know, 1% of the energy out of the gasoline. You know, I can just do a few little tweaks to make it burn the fuel better. You know, it can want things that it costs less money. It can actually use fuel, like it can eat garbage, you know, and run. Well, wouldn't that be a much better machine, one that's much more efficient? So then we're going to have a conversation about if you're going to make human beings, right? Shouldn't we try to make them into good human beings? I mean, ones that work well. So shouldn't we have some plan to, you know, raise children by certain rules, you know, that they should have to be programmed correctly to be integral to the function of the bigger machine of our civilizations and everything, like they know how to walk on the sidewalk and, you know, not litter and not spill oil on the street and do that, you know. Yeah, I mean, little basic ideas that they learn how not to bash people over the head with bricks and steal their money and, you know, those kind of basic ideas. Of course, these would be part of the philosophical conversations and you know, all leading up to some point. And we can see the staircase, as I'm sort of pointing out. We can see that we're walking up it. We can know there's stairs above us, you know, steps of acceptance of reality. And that's all we're really talking about, is accepting reality, right? Because you could see there was no God a long time before they declared God dead, right? So those people thousands of years ago could figure out, man, these are just stories, you know. And so they could see on the staircase is somewhere up there, oh yeah, someday they'll figure this out, you know, that this is all bullshit storytelling. You know, let's try to find the truth. And you know, the truth is we live in a stupid, cold universe, and we're just bugs. Frankly, we're a form of the you know, insects, little ocean worms, however you want to go back, how far back you want to go. Little squiggly devices that steal energy to make copies of themselves because of a a DNA mechanism. Anyway, I'm just saying that so we haven't even gotten to that step where that's been accepted by most people. Even though it's so obvious, it's on the staircase. That's one of the facts you step up, to get to the next step. And so I would argue that this whole context of this story, again, is what they have invested in. People have invested in ideas that are not going to be on the staircase. Okay, there are ideas on the, that'll be they'll be taken off the, this is what intelligence looks like. This is where it goes. And they're the anti. They're the rung on the ladder that breaks. So we've gotten rid of all the breakable ladder, rungs, and we're trying to say, well, what can I tell somebody? What can I give the future? Is a good narrative of explaining what the steps are that are solid, and now take it from there. Go find the next step. But the point is that we can see it. You can see where it goes, and it doesn't go anywhere good. It doesn't go anywhere to some grand accomplishment in the end, because once you have the robot part and you have the programming part, you can see how it's just circular. That the environment is suiting to the programming, and the thing is just chasing, the heroine, and that's all that's taking place. You're just making something hungry for what happens to be in the maze, to be chased, and it's going somewhere to get a flag that tells it to go back, and then it goes forward, and then goes back, and and they're just little messages, it just goes from message to message. I don't know, should have a better metaphor for how circular and redundant and dysfunctional the whole mechanism of putting the need inside of us, the compulsion to even climb the staircase, the need to control the environment, when the control is not to be needing to control the environment. All right, well, anyway, so let's just say with it, so you finally conclude that there is a problem. Like, let's say we're slaves to some overlord Borg, and we might say, some sensible slave might say, well, let's stop having kids because, our kids are slaves. They're just going to be slaves to the Borg. The Borg is going to just use them up and then eat them. No good end in sight. There's no way to fight the Borg. The Borg has all the weapons. There's guns pointed at us, cameras watching us all the time. No way we can fight back, nothing to win. So they would argue, yeah, let's stop this. And then you just, and then somebody else makes the, the sensible argument. Okay, well, let's, make a rule that nobody can have kids anymore. Sensible. The majority says so. Okay, so the majority of the slaves vote, okay, to abstain from, making babies. And then the other half says they're not going to do it. So the majority doesn't win. I mean, and so how big a minority gets to decide the majority's wrong? 10%, 5%, 2%, and the majority has no right to say to them, we're going to force you to comply. And, force means force. I mean, we're really going to force you. Just like we forced some things out of existence, like bullfighting and different things. We passed laws, put people in jail if they do it, kind of thing. You can go to jail for recklessly harming animals now, which is a good thing. And how draconian does it need to get? Well, obviously the law only needs to get as draconian as the lawbreakers wish to be. So the more draconian the lawbreakers get, the more draconian the law has to get. So, the more aggressive the lawbreakers get, let's say. So you start with, you pay a $10 fine. Well, if $10 fines don't work, then you make $100. And if that doesn't work, you make it $1,000. And then if that doesn't work, then you start putting them in jail. You know, and if that doesn't work, then you start shooting them on sight, right? Eventually. So, you know, but does it work some other way? No, of course it doesn't work any other way. There's no perfect solution to resolving conflict. The fact is somebody has to win, right? I mean, you know, in World War II, it was either the Nazis or the not Nazis, right? So, you know, there's an outcome. You know, one side gets to win, one side has to lose. You can't compromise in some way. There's not some other place you go to. So in the end, I'm simply arguing there's going to be a point where this argument will have to be fought out, and yes, there may still be programmed humans on Earth who are raising their kids to be morons, you know, religious kooks or some other kind of kook who need to have babies for God or whatever, and there's going to be a law that says, you know, we're really not doing this shit anymore, and there might have to be a war over it. I'm not saying there has to be, I'm just saying there might have to be. That all of these things are going to be part of the equation. That, you know, none of that's out of the realm of the possibility. But I would argue it's just like some guy who, you know, when they knew when Mount St. Helens was going to erupt, and there was a moron who, you know, sat on his property and said, "I'm not leaving," you know. And he was sort of a moron in the sense I think he really thought, oh, scientists don't know what they're talking about, you know. So he got blown up. Yeah, well, I guess so. That's the consequence of him, you know, investing in his beliefs. So there's going to be consequences to that. Well, anyway, but I don't want to give it. So anyway, just the very fact that I would make this argument that yes, some things are going to require the traditional problem is going to be raised, where there are two conflicting ideas and they can't compatibly coexist. Okay, they just can't. The interest of one people is destroyed by the interest of another person having what they want. They both can't have what they want. One has to be a winner and one has to be the loser, because there is no satisfactory compromise. So that makes me a violent person, because I acknowledge that truth. I'm somehow like violence. All right, so I've made the same sort of argument about, I've used metaphors. So let's say there's a the stake is that we're gonna spend we have a pile of money and we're going to spend it to address malaria, and I'm on the side that says let's spend all the money investing in a cure, and these other people are on the side of no, let's just buy mosquito nets for the current victims, and you know, we'll prevent one generation from getting bitten by mosquitoes, and then we'll run out of money and that'll be it. So I'm arguing that one side is, you know, much more logical than the other, and yes, the downside is the current victims are neglected, and they're going to be sacrificed in a sense, and that's just a fact. That's going to be one of the costs. That's going to be one of the bottles I'm going to knock down to save, you know, the bigger bottle, in my opinion, the more precious thing in the china shop. Now, does that make me a mean and horrible person because I recognize that there's more value in the one bottle than the little, you know, the little bottle I knocked over will be a lot less damaging than the big bottle I saved. So that makes me a horrible person? I think so. It makes me a cat killer because I recognize that cats, the whole population of cats, the whole existence of cats as number one slaves to human beings isn't great. That they're, you know, they're not wild animals. They have been deliberately created by us and molded by us over thousands of years to have dependencies and needs, and I think it's just horribly cruel to force those animals to eat garbage on the street and, you know, to take to live short, brutal lives of hunger and dissatisfaction, struggle. I think it's cruel, and I think people who think they can solve the problem with their mosquito nets, you know, their short-term, cuddle the ones that exist, you know, philosophy are going to let the big bottle fall, and they're going to keep perpetuating the problem. They're going to keep imposing the slavery. And I think that's horribly cruel, and so I'll say it's cruel. And I'll invest in strategies that are designed to prevent, by recognizing that it isn't so bad. Okay, when you put a cat to sleep to cut its nuts off, it wouldn't be a horrible tragedy if the cat didn't wake up. There's no, oh my God, it's Mars. You know, Mars is a tragedy. You don't look at Mars and go, oh, it's a tragedy, because there's no Martians on it. You don't cry tears and do all this horse shit. So why are we pretending there's a crisis when there's no crisis? The cat won't die of anything now. Okay? He never had a bad day. He didn't have to sit there and say, where's my fucking nuts? You know, he didn't have to go through any of that unpleasantness. And the sacrifice was what? Struggle. So, you know, I'm saying logically that makes sense to me. That makes me a cruel and horrible person. That makes me somebody you can slander, okay, as a killer. Because I recognize that you save so much more. I mean, there's deers now in this town, which is kind of funny because it's quite urban. You know, and I watch them early in the morning when the traffic starts to accelerate, and then they're in places where they really don't want to be, you know. And, you know, they're dancing all over the place trying to figure out which way to go because they don't know quite which was the safe route. Well, anyway, the point is they shouldn't be here. They're not in a place they can be sustained. The population needs to be reduced. What's the solution? You know, the solution isn't taking these deers and moving them somewhere, because that's really, really expensive. And what will it do? It just make the deers in some other place too crowded, and they'll end up having more pressure to move into the urban area. So you're not going to solve the problem by moving them somewhere. So how are you going to solve the problem? I mean, they keep breeding. They keep having more and more children that don't have any place to live. What's your solution? No, I mean, the sensible solution is, yes, as humanely as possible, prevent their, you know, procreation. Prevent them from expanding the problem. That's your first priority, is make the problem smaller. And just do it as humanely and quickly and as decently as possible. Gracefully exit the bad scenario. And those are the solutions, in my opinion. The solution to the whole Lyme disease thing, all of this was all created because people couldn't have a realistic recognition that you have to go back to numbers, you know, deer populations that are, you know, that can be sustained for 10 years. You get the population low enough, then you don't have to worry about it for 10 years. You know, I would argue for extermination, but whatever. People are afraid of extinctions. Extinctions, you know, give them the willies. And it really wouldn't be an extinction because there's lots of other places they exist. So there's not like they don't exist someplace else where the genetic code will still exist. But you're not giving them a life. You're not saving their life. You're just perpetuating torture. You're perpetuating misery for nothing. How much you want to pay for it, too. So I can bring up arguments about, so if I make an argument about football, you know, and so this is where it gets, you know, or you know, some other bullshit that the human race invests in. For what purpose do you program anybody to give a shit or to participate? How many kids do you have to paralyze before you say it's too expensive? I would argue one is way too many, okay? That it's too silly, too preposterous a game. All this wasted money on uniforms and this and stadiums and blah blah, all this crap. It's a mockery of our existence that we find this nonsense entertaining, or that we can't find a more efficient way to eat a potato chip. You know, I need something to go with my snack food. You know, you can't find something better to watch than a redundant play too. It's the same play over and over again. You know, you could just play the old games and watch the old ones over again. I don't remember who won the World Series in 1974. Maybe I could just watch the whole season over again. You know, why do they have to play a new season? Why don't I just watch the old one? Yeah. And so if I was to say, it's child abuse, well, they get all offended. But isn't it? I mean, what is it? You're putting your kid at risk for no good reason. There's no accomplishment here. You're just saying I'm going to accept torturing some kids for the splendor, for this great victory of having this game thing to do, to be obsessed with, to be addicted to. And that's all it is. It's a soap opera. It's an addiction. Nobody should be addicted to it. So you can make the same argument about being vegetarian or vegan. Is that if you're raised that way, you're not going to know the difference, and you're not going to miss it, so to speak. This is like cigarette smokers arguing everybody should be a cigarette smoker. I mean, that would be retarded. And it's just as retarded. Yet they want people to bow to it as if it's a sacred belief. Their sacred little notions of function and value. And then they'll call somebody else crazy or a lunatic or violent or say some other kind of crap because they would say, I'm going to defend the victims. I'm going to, do something to stop you molesting, children with your silly theories of reality that football's important enough to kill kids for. Not only just kill them, but, paralyze them, maim them, injure them. And then even all the crap it does to their psychologies, all the winning and losing stuff you have your kids investing in, where you destroy them psychologically. Who hasn't been, to some extent, experienced some of that damage in adolescence? I mean, all that crap. Because you lie and no one tells kids the right story, the truth, because you can't raise a kid with the truth because it would be too daunting, to have it explained to them. Well, most of the world is insane. yeah, that's the world you're going to live in. I had you so you can live in a world full of insane lunatics. Won't that be fun? Anyway. So, so the rhetoric, the snottiness of this person, this question mark asshole, is just so useless in this attempt to assassinate my character because I say things that he can't philosophically be comfortable with, because he wants to live in his little bubble of, oh, there's a perfect solution. If we just think forever, we can find the perfect solution to every problem. You're not going to... Again, the money's on the table. And these people put nothing on the table. Just like he's hiding behind the image of a llama. The money's on the table. The decision is yours. Do we spend it curing malaria, or do we spend it on Band-Aids? It's your responsibility. All the victims, are sitting there pleading with you. Save me, save me, save me. It's your decision. Now, if you don't find the cure, you wasted the money. That's oh boy, that's, ooh. All of those victims I could have helped with, preventing them from getting malaria in the short term. All those short-term victims I sacrificed. Yeah, but if you do the other... and you you did all your little Band-Aid games, and the fact was the first $10 would have found the cure. You didn't even need to spend the whole $1 billion. All you needed was $10 more, and you would have found the cure. There's nothing undaunting about any of this, and to think you're just going to... I will just treat all of it as if there's some fairy tale little, the fairy godmother will show up and tell me what the right decision is. No, you're stuck. We're stuck with our limited knowledge and an obligation to anticipate as best we can hugely consequential impact, hugely different worlds created. And I don't think you're taking any of that seriously at all. You're just a silly, frivolous, trivial person sitting here pretending you have answers when you have zero. when you're sitting there with the table of money and you're saying, I don't know what to do. I can't make a decision. It's not my job. You're just evading the questions. You're not answering them. And then he pretends to be soliciting answers from other people. Well, anyway. So I think all these people did a very good job. I've already now talked through most of the time. So, I don't know if I need to play much of this, but let's just jump somewhere randomly and see what they're saying.
Horribly horrific, unwinnable game, and therefore it's better not to make new beings and to look for an exit strategy.
So let's say it's always a bad game in the sense that you're always going to end up fail, right? I mean, it happens to all the best of us. Even our little precious celebrities get old, delusional, and die. I mean, they, in some horrible way. Some of them don't even get that old, and get terrible, just ruined, horrible, terrible. So it all ends in failure and death, in the sense that all that you've worked for is destroyed. Frankly, you don't even left with an ability to control what happens to that as a reputation or an icon. You just end up being some silly statue they build or something, right, where they say he was this and he was that, and and it's not the truth, So they make heroes out of assholes, and they make assholes out of heroes, and so the whole game is just so futile.
While still believing, they could theoretically believe that an evil demon created this torture, which seems far more realistic than a benevolent god. So there's nothing that disqualifies a non-physicalist from being an ethicist. I would just find it difficult to maintain a conversation.
Well, yes, it's exactly. So yeah, so I didn't know they were. So they're just talking about how much nonsense should we take seriously? I mean, how much time should be wasted on narratives that people are just making up? Like the virtual reality thing, like we live in a matrix or some other kind of horse shit. So you can make up fake, phony stories that you're going to require somebody to give you logical proofs against forever. I mean, you can just change Bugs Bunny into Donald Duck, and then you can change him into Daffy Duck, and then you can change him into that skunk guy, Pepe Le Pew, and then you can just, you can make endless characters, for your endless fables. But how about, what's the point? It's just a waste of time, because a smart, an honest, intelligent person, a person who has some knowledge of facts, physical reality, the experiments that have been conducted, none of that stuff has any evidence. There's no reason to believe any of it.
Thanks. Amanda, any comments on
No, I mean, I just would have to agree with what Glenn said. I mean, I don't...
Yes, he is often right. Yeah, so everybody should just do that. Just, agree with what Glenn says. Yeah, it's the right thing to do.
Is done. The mission is accomplished. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well or not, but yeah, I hope that the message is delivered. And
okay, so I would turn that into just as he's saying, this mission accomplished thing, right? That we don't have any good mission. The fish in the ocean are still doing the same thing we're doing. Just eek, just trying to find comfort, just trying to manipulate their environment to get what they need to be comfortable, and that's all we're doing. Doing the same things. It's just the same game over and over and over. There's no mission accomplished here. And is the game in any way sensibly proportional to what you're paying for it? Is there any rational currency here of actual accomplishment versus squandered and wasted torture? And I would argue, again, football doesn't, all of football, all of it, its whole wonderful history, doesn't defend one paralyzed kid. It just doesn't add up to being, oh yeah, that was worth it. No, how the fuck do you make sense out of that? It's so trivial.
Arthur Schopenhauer said once, I'm not sure if if this is the exact quote or not.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's really about arguments, not people. Obviously, Schopenhauer, just like me, carries huge liabilities. I mean, his opinions on some other subjects are just so frickin' stupid. He was overtly chauvinist and, had whole kinds of stupid and moronic theories. So, I mean, you just have to take individual arguments for what they are. And just, I don't know how much value name dropping has.
Of them is where he's putting more importance. I mean, it's unfortunately what happens to a lot of people when they're not able to perform veganism or be vegan, is that they go completely backwards in the shit that comes out of their mouth too. They're all of a sudden not able to.
Yeah, so this is a whole nother argument, this infighting part that's just so useless. So I often argue, just as you can be an anti-natalist and I could have had 10 kids in my life. And me coming to the conclusion that, boy, having kids was a dumb idea, I'm just as good an anti-natalist as anybody else, as long as I'm saying that, yes, I agree, having kids is a really dumb idea. I was really stupid. I was reckless and irresponsible. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing at all. It's horrible. What a mistake I've made. Oh, shit, what a mess I made. That admission makes me as good an anti-natalist as somebody who's never made the mistake. So it's just acknowledging the mistake. So frankly, as far as I'm concerned, somebody could be still eating meat, aggressively eating meat even, I suppose, as long as they're admitting they suck, that they're completely dysfunctional and out of control, and they can't, they're trying, but there's no try in them to stop them. They're compulsively driven. They're weak. They're fail. As long as they're acknowledging they're failing, and as long as they're voting for save the animals, why would I sit there and say they're not good enough? That's not clean and simple enough. They're conceding they're making a mistake. They're not doing the right thing. All of that. Why would I worry about it? And again, if I said, I wouldn't personally be able to do it. I'm just saying that, theoretically, I wouldn't have a problem with eating roadkill. I wouldn't have a problem with eating dead humans. Okay, so if I say theoretically, yes, if it meant life or death, me being able to, keep fighting in the war, yeah, I had to eat a dead person. I had to eat meat. So what? As long as it's non-consequential, it's not going to add to the problem. It's not an advocation. It's not a vote for make cows that produce milk. Let's say let's make cows do this and make this do that. It's not voting for any of that stuff. So why the hell would that make any difference to the subject? And it doesn't make any difference. But again, this is what it all gets about, is that people, they're just wearing team colors. Their team is better than somebody else's team. I mean, they're just still caught up in the psychology of philosophy, not the philosophy, not the, what is the meaningful concept? And the meaningful concept is, what are you voting for? What are you working towards? What kind of vibrations are you causing in the boat? And if you're causing the right vibrations, why do I care, about anything else?
Articulate anything about animal ethics or.
Yeah, so we won't, we sort of covered that, so we'll jump ahead a little.
Leif?
Yeah, I do agree with what Life Sucks said. The red button is pushing this button in order to seek a graceful exit for every single sentient being.
Right. Okay. So so the idea, is just as logical again as the fact that you sacrifice something to save something more valuable. So the whole idea is the red button just wipes out football. It wipes out the unnecessary paralyzed children. It stops the bad stuff. And the fact is that you understand you're not giving up anything good. And so the idea of instantaneous, a death that takes place in some kind of millisecond. I mean, so fast that you can't even calculate. You can't even sit there and say, it's happening. That sentence is too long. Okay, if I was to not exist in that short a period of time, where I had actually no time to even contemplate my non-existence, then how could somebody argue it was a harm? There is no torture, there is no suffering, there is no anguish, there's no even mental processing of the event. And yet you're going to argue that some physical reality took place, that some awful, terrible harm took place, when it didn't. And so the only thing harmed is our dignity. The only thing harmed is the idea that we have a personal story, we have a book to finish writing, we're important. And all of that isn't necessarily so. That's just what we think, and that's what we believe for ourselves, but it doesn't have necessarily any physical, real-world truth. So unless you can make a real-world truth that you needed to complete your fable, you know, that, you know, you were going to marry Prince Charming and do some happily ever after thing or whatever, until you can make some realistic argument that there was some real valuable thing that was prevented from happening by you being prevented, you can't make the argument. So, and again, just like I can make the argument that Mars is doing just fine, and the fact is that you can say, gee, it's not as fun, you know, as Earth. You can say some kind of silly thing, but the truth is, if you're going to analyze all the not existent paralyzed children, I mean, all the absent torture is something so big compared to the trivial, oh, they're not square dancing on Mars. There's no square dancing on Mars. How tragic. Yeah, and there's also no, you know, whatever, projectile vomiting. I mean, you know, it's a big win. Anyway, all right, so that's probably a good place to end. Yeah. So anyway, but you know, a bunch of this other stuff was just about, you know, again, there was little clips of, you know, crap, just crap about who I am and what I've been doing for 15 years, and these silly characterizations and these just so silly exaggerations and distortions of the actual message and the actual statements and what I'm actually valuing, you know, in terms of recognizing that you either do something right or you shouldn't do it at all kind of arguments, you know, even in terms of social structure and how much we value honesty and the truth. Do we have any respect for it at all anymore? You know, is there any institution that you know, has any real integrity? I mean, it's just, you know, these are in my opinion, they're real arguments that you have to, somewhere you have to pay for everything. And this is like I said, there's just so many people who just think it can all just be free money. It's all free lunch bullshit, free energy, free everything, and you don't have to pay for it. And yeah, you have to pay for it. So anyway, but it's just such bullshit to try to categorize me as some malicious, vengeful, petty. Any of that crap is just crap, because any passion I've put towards any arguments are in defense of victims, and it's a clear defense of victims and preventing their victimhood. So they are the perpetrators, and to defend their continued exploitation and molestation of victims, they're fighting back by pretending I have something in common with Adolf Hitler, and that's just bullshit. You know, it's just such a bad argument, frankly. It's so despicably low that and again, it only points out how we're winning the argument because they have to resort to just overt slander, you know, in a way of attempting to counter-argue. They can't argue the argument. They have to argue false, just plainly false accusations and distortions. But anyway, I really don't want to. It's not worth wasting time on these trolls, frankly. They get more attention than they certainly deserve because they aren't making any quality argument. And they're certainly not proposing anything called a realistic solution. Again, the money's on the table, and all they're doing is saying, let's just waste the money by doing nothing. Okay, because they won't commit to anything. Anything that'll fix anything. They have no plan, is the bottom line. Alright, so that's enough of a video. And so yes, I do intend to extract more of these subjects and get into more detail, but didn't happen. It didn't happen yet. So anyway, I tend to make more. I intend to, yes, make a more concise argument. You know, simpler, less than an hour and a half argument. All right, that's what I intend to do. I intend to make a perfect video someday, but yeah, I just haven't gotten there yet. I'm working on it. I'm trying. Whatever. Just stop nagging me. Oh, you weren't nagging me? You know, maybe that's something I'm making up, the nagging part, but I can hear it somehow. Somehow I hear nagging. But whatever. Might just be me.